The Joe Rogan Experience.
Looks exactly like Tower 7.
We were talking about predictive programming and how movies and like spells can predict stuff in advance and, kind of prepare you for the future of what's coming. In 1999, a movie came out, which was effectively a manifesto. And that movie was called Fight Club. And what's the end of that movie? The end of that movie is the collapsing of the buildings, which are the financial system, of the future, so that they can create a new future. Who produced that movie? Arnon Milchan. Who is Arnon Milchan? And they got a commercial director to do it, Fincher. And he's an excellent director, and I think it's a excellently, beautifully made film. But who is Arnon Milchan? Well, he himself has said, I am a Mossad agent. And he said that out loud. Like, that's not me saying that. That's him saying that. And Fincher said, oh, yeah, my last movie, that was made by an arms dealer. Well, that's him. That's Arnon Milchan. And so, and what's another Arnon Milchan movie? The Medusa Touch with George C. Scott and I think Lee Remick. And in that movie, what happens? An airplane crashes into a building, and you could probably pull that one up too. An airplane crashes into a building. This guy's obsessed with airplanes crashing into buildings and buildings collapsing in movies. And so what's likely? Has he been reading these scenario plans that defense departments make and that are maybe, Mossad, plans that are made? I've worked for the DoD through John Milius, and we wrote scenarios. They gathered together a bunch of Hollywood writers into a what is it, like a conference room, it was like more like a ballroom, but like a small one, and gathered a bunch of us together around a table and said, let's come up with ways on how to attack Los Angeles. And we all wrote scenarios on how to attack LA. And now they just use AI to do all that. But so, has he just been like reading these? Does he have access to them? And so he just puts them into his movies? Well, that movie was made in 1999. And what happened right after that movie got released? Those
9/11.
Buildings came down.
Yeah.
9/11 came down. And so is it predictive programming where you're showing the world what's to come and that makes it almost somewhat acceptable to do?
Whoa.
Or is it just coincidence?
And
most people out there will say,
Mossad.
"Oh no, it's just coincidence. It's coincidence." And he just happens to be. I mean, that's what he has said. I don't know if he is or not Mossad, but that's what he said. You're talking about evil. You know who the devil was in The Exorcist?
Who?
Well, they say it's like Pazuzu, and we're presented with an actual devil. But when you actually watch the movie, there's kind of evidence that. And people have talked about this, that, there's evidence within the film that it's more than just demonic possession, that the demonic possession comes from someplace. And by the way, Jeffrey Epstein was doing also funding research in how trauma affects like clairvoyance and telepathy and things like that, how you're able to invoke those out of trauma. And in The Exorcist, there's, you have Reagan, who's Linda Blair, and there's that party scene. And you remember in The Exorcist, they're making a movie within the movie. They're actually shooting a movie. The character of the mother is she's acting in a film inside of the movie, and there's a director in that film, and they have a big party scene after it, and the director, he's basically yelling at the butler, her houseman, calling him a Nazi and stuff like that. And he's, I bet you went bowling with Goebbels and things like that. Well, for a while, he vanishes from the party. And we later see like Reagan afterwards, like completely flipped out, like laying in bed. And then after that, she comes, and then he's leaving the party, and he turns to the mother, and he's like, I have to tell you something. I have to tell you something. Fuck it. And he leaves. And so, and then after that, Reagan comes down, and she looks to the astronaut guy and says, you're going to die up there. And then she pisses on the floor, and everybody's like, shit. And from that moment on, there's all this like highly sexualized devil speaking through her with a British accent. And the guy, the director, is a British guy. And so the implication, and then he is for some reason left with Reagan and then gets thrown out of the balcony and his head is twisted all the way around and he dies as a character. So the implication is that the director is the one who has raped Reagan and thus invoking this demonic presence into her. And it turns out that...
I thought it was some totem that they found and it was possessed.
All of that stuff is there. The Ouija board is there and everything. But it turns out that William Peter Blatty actually made a movie called John Goldfrapp, Your Life is blah, blah, blah. I can't remember the exact title of the film. And he made that movie with Shirley MacLaine. And the director of the film is this guy, J. Lee Thompson, British director, who looks exactly like the actor in that. And so the idea is that Reagan's mother is Shirley MacLaine, and Reagan is her daughter, Sasha. And the British director is J. Lee Thompson. And when you start looking at his movies, they're a little strange. There's he directed the original Cape Fear, which has a kind of strange pedophilic thing going on in it.
So does the second one.
And
right?
they all do. And then especially they amplify it.
Yeah, with
in
Juliette
the second
Lewis
one.
and Robert De Niro.
He did this movie Kinjite with Bronson, and that all has kind of like a weird pedophilic thing. He did this movie, The Reincarnation of Peter Proud, where Peter Proud dies, and then Peter Proud remembers his reincarnation. He remembers his iteration of his other self who was murdered. And then he hunts down the woman who maybe did it and then starts sleeping with her daughter, which is basically sleeping with his daughter because he's reincarnated. So this guy, as a filmmaker, has done all this. And so the question, and so William Peter Blatty worked on that film with Shirley MacLaine, and shortly thereafter wrote the book The Exorcist. And Sasha, in her autobiography, even mentions, the person on the cover of the book looked a lot like me. And everyone's just saying, oh, it's just a coincidence. And, I never walked down the stairs on all fours and I never vomited, pea soup or whatever, that none of that ever happened to me. But there's a pretty dark implication behind the whole film. And I brought it up with William Friedkin. Hey, is this meant to be J. Lee Thompson? Is this a way to talk about that actually happened, in real life? And he said, I cannot talk about that, but I'm not saying you're wrong.
Whoa.
And so, and there's actually a moment where Reagan is talking to her mother and she's like, well, do you like him? Do you like him like you like daddy? And so there's this idea that he's been coming over and they've been having this affair. And then all of a sudden she says to her daughter, and it kind of jumped out at me when I rewatched it. She says to her daughter, well, I like pizza, but I wouldn't marry one. And I was like, oh my God, there's like a pizza reference like in the middle of this, in the middle of everything that's happening.
How long is that?
That's Periola,
what
but
Ben
still.
Swan brought up during the whole Pizzagate thing that got him fired. But how long has the term pizza been used?
Well, it jumped out at me, and The Exorcist is in the early 70s, and so what is it, 1971, and that movie that he did with Shirley MacLaine, who is effectively, that's the movie that they're shooting inside of the movie. And so this was a way for William Peter Blatty to kind of transcode all of that. And the astronaut in the film, Shirley MacLaine, talks about the I can't remember if it was her husband or boyfriend that she remarried who was an astronaut. And in her autobiography, she talks about how he was cloned. He came back from space and a different person, that he was cloned. And everybody kind of laughed it off like, oh, it was just kind of a joke that I wrote into my autobiography. But it's kind of weird.
Real weird.
Yeah, it's really strange. So people speak through movies, and they hide information in films. And so I think that
some more than others, right?
Yeah, William Peter Blatty, who was doing all sorts of Ouija stuff with Shirley MacLaine, who was really into that kind of thing back in the late 60s and early 70s. And he sits down to write his book, and what's he writing about? Well, he's writing, that movie's about Shirley MacLaine, her daughter, Sasha, Sachi, and the astronaut, and it's all, and J. Lee Thompson, who basically he eviscerates within the film, but in a way that nobody really connects it. It all happens off camera. But the implication is that she was raped by that director. And from that moment on has a kind of, she's speaking with a British accent as the devil. It's his voice, actually, that's coming out of her. She's talking about, being raped by a crucifix.
That actor, that's his voice? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's like the voice of I think his name is McGowan, and he died like shortly after the film was made also. Shortly after The Exorcist was made.